My name is Troy Jensen, and you're listening to Government Teacher Unplugged.
Mr. Vice President, Mr. Speaker, members of the Senate and of the House of Representatives, yesterday, December 7th,
Without objection, 5-minute voting will continue. Without objection, order. Without objection, 5-minute voting will continue. The unfinished business is on the vote and the motion of the gentleman from Illinois.
Welcome back to Government Teacher Unplugged. Today we'll be talking about Brutus I, probably one of the most famous Anti-Federalist papers. After the Constitutional Convention, a series of essays were published arguing for and against ratification of the new U.S Constitution. The Anti-Federalists argued against ratification. Today we will explore Anti-Federalist number 1, or commonly known as Brutus I. Some of the main arguments for Brutus I was state sovereignty would be dissolved. This was probably one of the biggest arguments for Brutus I. And the reason behind that was the idea that states would lose complete control and power. The next argument that was made in Brutus I was state legislators became almost powerless. They argued that the necessary and proper clause is just too broad, and that social contract becomes unlimited. Federal powers become so strong that they really diminish the rights of the people. And the last argument that's really made in Brutus number 1 is underrepresentation of the people. The main objection against the Constitution by the Anti-Federalist, and as articulated through Brutus I, was the desolation of the sovereignty of the states to form one great republic. In this regard, he notes, the first question that presents itself on the subject is whether a confederated government be the best for the United States or not, or in other words, whether the 13 United States should be reduced to one great republic, governed by one legislature and under the direction of one executive and judicial, or whether they should continue 13 confederated republics under the direction and control of a supreme federal head for a certain defined national purpose only. According to Brutus, the two clauses essentially rendered the various state governments powerless. He believed that the Constitution and laws of every state would nullified and declared void if they were or shall be consistent with the Constitution. So what this means is that any laws that the states passed, if there's a federal law that kind of is more stringent or more harsh, then the federal law would then become control. So this is one of his greatest arguments. Brutus also argued that under the necessary and proper clause, Congress would be able to repeal state fundraising laws. Now, what are state fundraising laws? These are taxes. He argued that the federal government would be able to take complete control of all finances within the citizens so that they might not be able to pay the state taxes. That federal taxes would be more important than state taxes. If Congress believed that a state law may prevent the collection of a federal tax that is necessary and proper to provide for the general welfare of the United States, then Congress would have the authority to repeal the law under the necessary and proper clause. Furthermore, because all laws made in pursuance of the Constitution are the supreme law of the land, the states would have no recourse. Therefore, the government is complete and no longer a confederation of small republics. According to Brutus, there was no limit upon the legislative power to lay taxes, duties, imports, and excises. Although this authority was technically limited to raising money to pay debts and provide for the general welfare and common defense, Brutus argued that these restrictions do not pose any actual limitation on the legislative powers under the Constitution. In reality, only the legislature had the authority to contract debts and determine what is necessary to provide for the general welfare and common defense of the nation. Therefore, the legislative authority to lay taxes and duties is rendered unlimited. No state can emit paper money, lay any duties, or impose any imports or exports without the consent of Congress, and the net produce is for the benefit of the United States. Therefore, the only recourse left up to the states to support their own governments and discharge their own debts is by direct taxation. This too, however, could be eradicated by the federal government, who also has the power of direct taxes. Where the federal government exercises this essentially unlimited authority, it would be impossible for the states to raise money on their own behalf due to the limited monetary resources of its citizens. Without money, states cannot be supported and their powers would be absorbed by the federal government, thus eliminating any sovereignty or anonymity left to the states. So today, some opinions differ over the appropriate size, scope, and the power of the federal government. Regardless of these personal views, it is hard to deny that Brutus does make, several compelling arguments, really highlighting the dangers of a large national government. We're going to take a look at Brutus 1 and kind of outline some of his most important clauses in his paper. First clause I really want to talk about is when he states that this government is to possess absolute and uncontrollable power, legislative and executive, judicial, with respects to every subject to which it extends. For by the last clause of page 2, if the new government leads to a loss of liberty, then America, the place where liberty has the best chance to succeed, will fail and future generations will blame and despise us. What he's doing here is referring to the necessary and proper clause. The necessary and proper clause is located in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 18. The people must be careful about parting with power, as in creating a strong central government, because they're unlikely to ever get it back. In the Confederated government, as in the Articles of Confederation, most of the power belongs to the state. In a consolidated government, as in the 1787 Constitution, most of the power belongs to the central or national government. What he's referring to here is the idea of social contract. Okay? This is the exchange of rights for protections. Ultimately, the citizens will be giving up their rights for protections from the federal government. Another one of Brutus's arguments is that the new Constitution places so much power in a central government that state governments may no longer be able to function as republics under the control of their citizens. His idea here is that state governments will lose power over the people, that the people will really just stop caring about state legislatures. And he references this by stating Section 8, Article 1, it is declared that Congress shall have power to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers, and all other powers vested by the Constitution in the government of the United States, or in any department or office thereof. So Brutus really believes that the necessary and proper clause is just too powerful, that it gives too much regulation over its citizen, that it's a blank check of powers that the federal government could impose at any time. He also makes the argument by using the 6th article. It is declared that this Constitution and the laws of the United States, which shall be made in pursuance thereof, and the treaties made or shall be made under the authority of the United States, shall be the supreme law of the land, and the judges in every state shall be bound thereby. Anything in the Constitution or law or any state to the contrary notwithstanding. He goes on to say, it appears from these articles that there is no need of any intervention of the state governments between Congress and the people to execute any one power vested in the general government, and that the Constitution and laws of every state are nullified and declared void. And the idea behind this is that all laws on the state level will become null and void. Okay, if they're inconsistent with the U.S. Constitution, or any agreements that the states might have had, such as like treaties or laws made in pursuance thereof, a state government, are all under the authority of the United States. So the big idea here is that all state laws become null and void. The next big argument that Brutus makes is that in a large republic there are men of large fortunes and consistently of less moderation. There are trusts too great to be placed in any single subject. He has interest of his own. He soon begins to think that he may be happy, great, and glorious by opposing his fellow citizens, and that he may raise himself to grandeur on the ruins of the country. In a large republic, the public good is sacrificed to the thousand views. It is subordinate to expectation and depends on accidents. In a small one, the interest of the public is easier perceived, better understood, and more with the reach of every citizen. Abuses are less extent and, of course, are less protected. So what Brutus is saying here is the idea that if we have a large republic, the individual citizen is less represented, that the individual needs of the people are taken for granted. In a large republic, we may see more insubordination, where the needs of the citizens are less important to the needs of the actual individual. Another big idea from this is in such a large country, it'll be too hard for the representatives to really know the minds of the people, really know what they actually want. Writings from great thinkers and examples from history help to really kind of prove this point that Brutus uses. For example, politicians will be abusive with their powers because they weren't explicitly limited. With the necessary and proper clause, these powers can be expanded to the individual states. In such a large country, it really will be difficult for politicians to effectively voice the concerns of their constituent. Another one of Brutus's concerns was that the United States is too large to be effectively governed by a single central power. And because there's never been a historical evidence of such a republic succeeding, he uses the examples of the Greek and Roman republics that really became tyrannical as their territorial grew. This idea with a single central power, the constant clashing of opinions will prevent political action. Another big idea from Brutus was that a national government is too centralized in large republics, as well as checks on federal power could be undermined by the broad interpretations of promoting the general welfare, which would be claimed in every law, and all laws necessary and proper clause, which would be used to override limits on delegated federal powers. So the big idea from this is the fact that elected representatives could become so powerful that they stay in office. Now, I think this is a great idea from Brutus because he really overseen the idea that elected representatives could become so powerful beyond their own limits, that they can increase their power through the necessary and proper clause, that there were no constitutional limits on their powers. So really, whatever your failings about the Constitutional Convention or ratification from the states, Brutus does make some solid arguments against ratification, as well as the overarching power of the federal government. Thank you for tuning in today on this quick discussion and quick ideas from Brutus 1.